Welcome to our webinar. I'm honored to announce a new Volt MX is here. Over the last 12 months, this has been an exciting journey. At HCL, we're proud to share with you our newest product. Today, I'm joined by Suhas Bhatt, our Volt MX product management leader. Here's our agenda today. We will not only tell you, but show you the value of our advanced low-code platform for mobile and multi-experience development. If you have any questions at any point in time, please leave them in the chat for the Q&A section. Our goal at HCL is to be the #1 low-code vendor for citizen and professional developers. At HCL, we're making major investments in innovation and investments in our go-to-market. And it's our experience with our enterprise portfolio with products such as digital experience, commerce, Unica, and collaboration that makes our value proposition special. You know, whether you're a new or an existing customer, HCL will work with you to maximize your use of Volt MX in many ways. We'll bring our design skills to make sure that you have a 5-star app experience. We have lab services for accelerators, and we're offering you a professional grade platform and your choice of deployment, whether it's on-prem, hybrid, or cloud. Now, if you're an existing customer, our goal is to get all of you upgraded to Volt MX as soon as possible. I'm really proud to say over the last year, we've made tremendous strides in raising the visibility of the Volt MX platform. We've worked very closely with Forrester and also Gartner to participate in their industry analysis. And I'm proud to say that from Forrester, from a professional development low-code perspective, we're recognized as a strong performer. And from a Gartner perspective, we're recognized as a visionary in the multi-experience development platform area as well. Some of the things of note that came out through this is really our strong commitment to mobile and multi-experience development. Also, our strength in providing mixed reality capabilities for not only voice recognition, AR and VR, as well as support for wearables, IoT, and digital twin. All in all, we offer a solid, well-rounded platform for all of your low-code and professional development needs. And some of the things that make it really easy is the way we do API management and integration. And having a strong portfolio and an enterprise background makes our whole value proposition get stronger and stronger over time. So let me set some context on the next slide. So I'm going to talk about this in 2 slices. Firstly, I'm going to share with you what we think is the business value of the Volt MX platform. And then I'm going to hand over to Suhas to get into more of the technical detail itself. So what our customers appreciate, whether they're in retail, food services, manufacturing, oil and gas, or utilities, is that ability to create high fidelity, pixel perfect, functional mobile applications, as well as multi-experiences. And our value proposition is really in 3 areas. Firstly, you know, organizations want to gain value from the acceleration of using a platform when building their mobile or multi-experience apps. With Volt MX, we enable you to build once and deploy anywhere on all of those devices which I mentioned. And if you want to deploy the complete solution, as I mentioned, on-prem or in the cloud, we have that capability for you as well. And because we're a professional grade low-code platform, we support the full development lifecycle. And I know Suhas is going to cover some of that in his presentation as well. Another area where we shine and we help organizations is really integration without limits. So if you're faced with building a mobile or multi-experience application, a lot of the heavy lifting in building those applications is building connectivity and unlocking your existing data and processes at the back end. And with our strong Volt MX Foundry capability, we can do that faster than anyone else on the market And also, you don't need to buy another middleware layer from another organization to make that come to fruition. And then lastly, in the area of improving innovative interactions, we know in terms of talking to digital leaders that they're always looking for new ways to create a differentiated experience, a way to differentiate their brand. And more organizations are coming to us with business problems where VR, AI, voice chat, and also NLP ways of interacting are becoming important, whether it's in a retail scenario, maybe it's on a shop floor for a smarter worker-based app. Having the ability to add these high value, high functioning capabilities to your mobile experience becomes supremely important to the solution you're building. And if you're investing in Volt MX, you can do that too. So Volt MX is a extremely strong platform and is ideally suited for any of your solutions that you want to build at scale, whether it's from a small number of users to literally millions of users. So now I'm going to hand over to Suhas to give you more details about what's in Volt MX and specifically the 9.2 release. Over to you, Suhas.
Thanks, Andrew. Now, before we go into looking at what is new about the V9 SP2 version, let us have a recap of the features that were the bigger features that were built in the V9 version, right? So let's start with what is Volt MX. Again, this is just an introduction for folks that are new to this. Volt MX is primarily a multi-experience development platform that allows professional developers to be able to quickly build using low-code capabilities an application that can run on any device such as a phone, a tablet, a desktop, or a kiosk, or even wearables such as your iPhone or Android watches, right? And it lets customers or developers build the application once and deploy it to all these, whether it is native or responsive or PWA web format, right? So Volt MX, how does it do that? So Volt MX primarily has an IDE called as Iris, which is something that the app developer downloads to their local system and creates their client-side application logic and the visual design of all the forms and pieces that the user is interacting with, whether it in the mobile application or in the web application. It internally uses our omnichannel widget library called as Flare, so that the code that is written by the app developer in say JavaScript or using the visual code editor or no code, which internally generates JavaScript code to run as native applications in all the different platforms that we talked about, right? So it ensures that the app that is generated is true native and can leverage the full feature set of the underlying OS, right? So you have the option of either choosing a native binary output or a web output. It also uses what we call as Foundry. Foundry is basically our middleware data integration layer. So in addition to providing data integration to any type of backend that you have, and we have around 25 built-in adapters available right from the console. In addition, we also have like 70 odd adapters in the marketplace so that customers can make use of these to connect to any kind of backend. And we also have the option of having a custom Java or JavaScript connector for any system that is not having a pre-built connector. So at any case, while building with Iris and Foundry with Volt MX primarily, you are never at a point where you cannot do it. You always have a way of doing it, and we ensure that we make it easy for the most part. And for the corner cases or for some specific scenario, you can always go and write custom code. And from a DevOps perspective, we also have what we call as an app factory, which is basically a continuous integration and continuous deployment platform, which can ensure that as and when you're checking in your code, it works with your repository like GitHub and either builds the application right away and deploys it to some environments for your testing, or if you also checked in automated test scripts, run those test scripts and does a sanity and tell you that, hey, how many passed, how many failed, gives you those emails to give your test report as well as show the build time. You can configure it as on a per commit basis or on a nightly build. So you can basically configure this DevOps tool as you please, and it automatically works with all the pieces of Volt MX so that you have a seamless DevOps experience, which also includes automated testing. Volt MX also has a SaaS cloud offering, which is currently on AWS, where we can do the infrastructure and managed services, managed hosting pieces of it, so that the customer has the choice of either going on-premise for their deployment, where they maintain the infra and the managed hosting, or offload that to us and we will do it as part of our SaaS cloud offering. Volt MX also has a marketplace. So what the marketplace is primarily for is to serve as an accelerant for ensuring you can build your applications faster. The marketplace has hundreds of applications and sample components which range from, hey, how can I build a login component, or how can I build a login component that connects to LDAP, or how can I do this augmented reality, or how can I do this Alexa integration, or how can I do a text-to-speech, or any kind of scenario, or how do I do this specific animation, or how do I do a specific type of image gallery with this view, right? So, or it could be just like, hey, how do I build a PW application, or how do I build a simple 2-page application, right? So there are lots and lots of these sample apps and components which are in marketplace, and the marketplace is directly integrated with Iris. So from Iris, you can go and search for a component of your choice in marketplace. You can import sample apps. You can import a component into your existing application and make it work, right? So all this is available together as one suite, which we call as the Volt MX platform. So now let's look at some of the business process and application workflow related functionality that were added in V9, right? So we added what is called as an application storyboard. So an application storyboard ensures that the app that you are building, right? So yeah, before I go into this, let us just introduce the concept of a component. A component in Volt MX is primarily a piece of think of it as a module which has both the front end view of how the UI should look, along with any client-side logic, as well as any data integration pieces that is required for it to work. So it could be a login form which has the corresponding LDAP service as part of it, or it could be a simple augmented reality component which is having an integration with an AR kit, right? So it could be any of that, and you can either build your own components for reuse within your application, or you can import some of the components that we already have as part of marketplace so that you can use it in your application and get that functionality out of the box. So application storyboard lets you, make it easier to be able to build your application with these kinds of components. And it also lets you visualize the flow of logic within your application, right? So you can manage your application logic. You can switch between different form factors, like going from tablet to mobile to desktop. And this also lets you explain a story much better, right? So say you're a developer and you're trying to explain to the designer how this has to be, or usually the designer creates it and he uses this to explain to the developer as to how it has to be, or you're trying to show to your business analyst or business partner, hey, how is the application logic flowing, so that usually you're working at one form at a time, but this lets you visualize the application flow as a whole and see the navigation paths and tell the story better or explain the story better to folks that are interested, right? Now, Another new feature that we added is called as a client-side workflow. So what this essentially is basically it's a visual rules editor. So instead of writing code, you can effectively now drag and drop logic components, client logic components, so to speak, which could vary as simple as navigating to form or doing a try catch for a specific error, or invoking a service, or just setting a value for a variable. So pretty much all the functionality that you can do using code, you can do using this visual rules editor, so that now it makes it easier for folks to build applications with very little code. Because whatever you're doing with the visual rules editor, internally it generates the code for the application. So the app developer is not maintaining the code, they're only looking at it like a flowchart, right? And the workflow that your client workflow that you're building this way can be saved just like you're saving a function module in code, right? And you can reuse it across your application. Server-side workflow is another capability that we built in the version 9, which basically gives a BPMN, or business process management standard compliant workflow for managing business processes primarily. So usually what happens in a service is, right, it is in the context of an application user's session. Somebody made a call, it fetched some data and it returned, and its job is done. However, there are often scenarios in business where you want to maintain the context of a specific object, like a loan. Somebody creates a loan, somebody else looks at it and decides whether it is approved or not, and somebody else is going to send that information whether it is approved or not. Now, effectively, this could be 3 services, but you can combine all of this now using one workflow type of service now in Volt MX. So what this lets you do is be able to run long-running processes. It could be across multiple applications, multiple users, but you're still maintaining the context of it and working through the different stages. I'll explain this a bit more in the next slide, right? And this is internally using the existing server events bus, so it has very high performance and scalability. And it, as I said, it is built on top of the existing Foundry capabilities. So it has access to the object services or integration services or identity services that already existed, or even the messaging services to send emails. Let's look in a bit more detail. So how this is built is, say you have an object service of type incident, right? So, and the incident, we have a status field. The status field, when you're just created it, it is saying, hey, created incident. So the status is created. So the workflow has been developed by a developer so that, hey, when somebody creates an incident, the app developer who is actually doing that creating incident on the client application probably not even be aware, but the backend service of workflow now is constantly monitoring that object type of state, object called as incident. And when there is a new status called as created, it goes and says, oh, what do I need to do for this? Oh, somebody has specified that do 2 things. Send a confirmation email to the person that created it and assign it to somebody who can actually look into it, a supervisor, so to speak, who can look into it and decide who needs to work on it, right? So now this forking and segregation of responsibilities happened automatically because you've specified this in the workflow. The admin or the supervisor who is going to actually look at the task and decide who has to work on it could look at it 2 minutes later or 2 days later, but it is still waiting in the queue. And the person, when they come, they have the benefit of the context through which the workflow has passed. Now the user can then assign it to somebody, and the other person, the worker, could accept the incident to work on it. And once they mark it as complete, again, all the thing that is moving the workflow through the different, the path is the state change of that object from created to assigned to completed, right? And on completion, it can automatically, as it's specified here, send another email to the person saying it is done, right? So this is how an workflow works, and in this case, it is tied with an object service. There's also a new type of service that we built called as business rules engine. And in business rules engine, what you can do is you can create English like language so that you can write logic without writing code. So if you can see this example here, it's a very simple example like, hey, if credit rating is greater than this, you give a name, you give a description, but essentially the condition is what managing what the flow is. If condition is less than 600, then it says it is rejected. If condition is between 600 and 700, do something else, right? So basically I'm writing logic and I'm specifying what action has to be taken if my condition meets or not, right? So this is just another type of capability that was added. So now let's look at a demo which is walking through the different features that we just talked about, right? So right now we are looking at a storyboard view of a simple application. So as you can see, it's a new tab, and I can go and click on every form to see how the navigation path towards it is. I can click on a specific action, such as the on click of a button here, the login button in this form, and I can see the visual rules editor to show what is the application flow or the logic flow when that button is clicked. You see the different paths it traverses, and you can do different things like, we talked about navigating to a form or showing an alert. What is the alert? And you can have different conditional logic, and you can add a snippet. You can show a loading indicator, dismiss a loading indicator. You can invoke a service and map the variables from your UI, like your username and password, to the appropriate fields in the backend to the service. You can dismiss your loading indicator, navigate to a form on a specific logic. You can have success and failure going to different paths. So you can pretty much define your logic right from that visual workflow editor. You can always switch to design to see a specific form. Now we are showing the different forking breakpoints for a UI. So for a desktop, right, a responsive web especially, you want the web page to be responsive depending on the size or the width of the browser. So you can define breakpoints such that when the width falls within a specific breakpoint, you can rearrange the elements within that web page so that it looks best for that form factor, for that screen size. So this is just showing a sample of the different breakpoint forking for a desktop web, which was also another new feature that was built in V9. Now let's look at how it is built on the server side piece of it. So now we are going into Foundry, and in Foundry we are looking at this customer data model where this workflow state is mapped to an approval workflow. So this is a case where somebody is creating a loan approval. So somebody created an application and submitted it. It invokes a service. So in this case, as we said, it is invoking an integration service, and it is passing the value that is sent from the user in the previous state, right? And it is making use of a workflow context. The workflow context is what ensuring that the context of that object is maintained and available for the other players or other pieces in that workflow whenever they reach it, whether it be immediately or, as I said, even a week from now, right? So that workflow context makes that possible. So we are also seeing a simple rule service being invoked here, so that automatically, based on whatever parameters it got, the credit score, so to speak, it can decide whether it can run a rule and decide whether the rule says it is approved or rejected, or it has to go to somebody to review, right? So here we see how the input parameters for that rule is configured, and automatically on approval you can send an email, or so you basically set the paths for the exclusive gateway here and what makes it to that path. So this path is specifically set to go for an approve, and similarly you can have another path set for reject. So that way you are configuring that in the path itself, and again it is fed from the previous stages of the workflow itself. And here we say, okay, I can even create my email template right from the workflow service itself, and I can pass in attributes like the first name or email and other pieces that I got earlier in this workflow. And if a person needs to sit and review an application, you can send it to them as well in which case it will wait on the user task until it is done. This workflow editor is also has ability to zoom in, zoom out, and such like that. Now that we saw the design portion of it, let us look at how the runtime portion of this looks like, right? So the workflow service, so we have different instances of that, and every instance of that workflow service invoked, you can click on it and see the different stages, how long it took, when it was initiated, and whether it was successful or failure. So and at any point of time, you can click on the workflow context to even see what the value of the variables are. So this is an example of a task that failed. And this failed task, effectively, we had a new feature added in the 9.2 version, wherein you can retry a failed task. I'll talk about it more when we go to the 9.2 section. And you can also send an email. This is one of the sample emails that I showed you in the template earlier. So this shows some of the services and the functionality that we built in the V9, right? So in addition, we also had made advances in integration with AI and NLP. So here we see a sample of a user talking to a chatbot. So basically, it is internally using text to speech, speech to text to convert what the user is saying into text, and then it using NLP to match the intents and decide how to respond to that question. So basically, when you are integrating something like this, you can choose any NLP or AI provider of your choice, train them, and Volt MX gives you a nice way of having that integrated easily into your application and surface it for your customers. So in this case, we see that somebody is asking questions about their credit and loan check and how it will affect their credit score, or what will be the rate for a specific house and stuff. So basically, they are interacting with the application just like they're interacting with a call center customer support person directly from the app, because they're effectively even talking and getting the responses, and all this is made possible using Volt MX. We also made significant improvements to the responsive web and modern web experiences. Architectural changes were made to make CSS 3.2 compatible, and we had made performance improvements. Automated testing also was made available. I'll go into this in a bit more detail later, where you can create your test cases, validate them, and run them as part of a DevOps process. Now let's look at what's new in the 9.2 version specifically, right? So before we jump into what's new, we have a brand new Volt Iris and Volt Foundry with this release. We also have launched the Volt MX Cloud right now with this release, and we are going to have a Volt MX Marketplace being launched shortly, and we also have moved the documentation to a new open source. We made it open source primarily because in addition to just reading documentation, now you have the option of contributing to the documentation and giving us suggestions on how to make it better, give a better sample of what we are trying to explain, or in general make it open and easier for everybody to contribute and make the documentation better, right? So now let's look at some of the specific enhancements that were made. The component that I talked about initially, the structure of a component has been enhanced so that now we have support for reordering the properties. You can conditionally render the properties. Basically, you can say, hey, if this is the case, render it, make it visible. If not, don't even build it, right? You have the ability now to add tooltips in your components. You have even support for events as pass-through, and we have added support for segments also to show up, right? And now let's look at some of the enhancements that were done to native and web frameworks. So with this release, we have added support for vector animations using Lottie. So I'll go into this in a lot more detail shortly when I'm showing the demo. We have also made significant enhancements to the augmented reality framework. We now actually have a widget called as augmented reality renderer, AR renderer, which you can drag and drop and use that for your augmented reality pieces of the application, and it also has enhancements such that you can add a in-frame help, like you can see in this specific snapshot, to ask the user to return to a specific area, or you can even combine this with the image recognition, so that if the augmented reality piece recognizes something, it can do something with it. I'll show you a sample of image recognition also shortly. Now let's look at a demo of Lottie, right? So Lottie, as I said, we have had animation in Volt MX for a while, right? But with this release, we have made it far easier for somebody to pick an animation that is available for free on the market, right? So you can go to Lottie animation. If there's like 100,000 free files, you can go and browse through a specific animation, see what you like. You can look at different categories to see if there is an animation that is trying to convey the intent that you're trying to put in the application. And when you like something, you can just download it as a JSON, right? And that JSON file, you can import it. So we basically have a component sample in Marketplace, which you can download and use that as a reference. So basically any animation file that you like, you can download it as a JSON and import it into your project and use it with just a couple of lines of code. So now it makes it really easy to build to get in really cool animations into your application much easier, right? So now let's look at a sample, right? So here is just few of the samples that I gathered from the net, and you can also edit the animations that you're seeing in the net. That the previous one was something I edited, so I can add them, I can put them on a timer, or I can build any logic. I can use the existing animation capabilities in combination with this, right? So I can build really cool applications with very little effort and add cool animations. So this is just a sample of that. Now let's look at a sample which has augmented reality. So this is also a sample that is available in Marketplace. I can download it and play with it. So here we are trying to show different 3D object models that we are going to render. So here is placing a flower pot in a garden, and then you can see all those instructions coming in to are available to help the user use that augmented reality piece better. So I'm trying to place another object in a room, or even placing a cup on your table. So basically this lets you play and work with augmented reality in your application in a more easy way. And this is internally using ARKit and ARCore from iOS and Android. Now let's look at a sample of image detection. So in this, what is happening is basically I have trained the image detection algorithm to detect specific images, and based on that do some specific actions. So it can detect this specific screen and say, oh, it is about Volt MX, and let me show you the Volt MX architecture. So I'm moving my hand behind to show that, hey, this image is actually rendered on the mobile application and not actually on the backend screen. And similarly here on this trigger, it is recognizing a different image and starting to play a video. So this is just two samples of me showing another inlay picture or playing an inlay video. You can use the image recognition to trigger to do other things in your application as well, right? So this is just to show a sample of augmented reality and image recognition are two new ways to make your applications cooler. From a DevOps and a test automation perspective, we've added significant enhancements. So I said that we had a test automation feature that we built in V9. I'll show a demo of it shortly. To that test automation, we have also added ability to add assertions, configure timeouts, wait for a specific time, take screenshots of failed expectations. So these are some of the enhancements that were made on that front. We've also enhanced added database versioning with the flyway to this release. We have had a protected mode in Volt MX, which gives you out of the box jailbreak detection, swizzling detection, and code obfuscation and all that. So with this release, it has been working for iOS and Android for a while. With this release, we have added code obfuscation support for web applications as well. And Xcode 12 support also has been added to App Factory with this release. Now let's look at a quick demo of the test automation piece, right? So here we are seeing that we have Jasmine test integration built in. You go to the specific case and say record a test case. So you can basically record a test case by just going through a specific scenario in your application, and the device has to be, it can be an emulator or it could be a device that is connected, and it automatically records everything that you're doing until you of course ask to stop. And so basically without any code, as you can see, just with my actions, this is getting created. I can go and always enhance it. Like I can add specific assertions like, hey, if this value is equal to A, or if this value is equal to B, consider this a pass. If it doesn't, then consider it as a failure. So I can go and enhance the test generation that is happening by default, but you are getting test generation for free, right? And this is just showing some samples. And I can go to multiple forms, work through that just like I would do a specific application. So I can split the login into something and the requesting as quote as another piece as well. So I can combine as much logic as I want as part of one test case or multiple. Once I'm done with what I want, I can then go ahead and make more changes if I want. So I can add a wait for, so if I'm making a specific service call, if I expect it to come back in certain time, I can add a value for it. I can save this with a name, stop the recording, and now I have a test case generated with no code, right? And once that is done, I can go and see it in my test case list there. I can go and now record another test case and save that as well, make any edits, give it a name and save it. So once I've saved that, I can create a test suite with any number of test cases that I want to run. So I'm creating a demo suite with these 2 test cases. And now I can run this test suite whenever I want. I can run the individual tests, or I can run the test suite as a whole as well. And you see the test case has run in the background on the side here, and you see all the test results showing up. And I have a test automation section here where you can go and see the passes and fails. And I can view the test results right from there. Now let's try to run a scenario where there is a failure, right? So I'm going to simulate a failure, and you see in case of a failure, even in the individual log, you can see the failed message. I can go to the Volt MX automator, and from there as well, I can see the failed message and the actual reason why it failed as well, right? So all this makes creating test cases, ensuring you check in just as your regular code, and running them and doing your sanity, right, way easier than what it was. And you had to not write any code to do this too, right? So this is about test automation. And going back to what we added specifically to this release. So we added the ability for wait, timeout and wait. So basically, if I'm invoking a service, I expect it to come back in 2 seconds, and if it takes longer than that, consider it as a failure. How long do I have to wait, right? So that is another case that we added here. It could be for anything. The integration service invocation was just one sample. If we expect some operation to be done even by a user within a certain time, and if they don't do it, timeout, that even that could be done as part of your test case. We also added a lot more cases for assertions. So we had simple assertions like equal, not equal even earlier. Now we have added a lot more types based on which something can be asserted as a positive or a negative. Of course, an assertion, positive or negative, is what determines if the test case succeeded or failed, so to speak, right? So we've added to match, to be defined, to be undefined, to be null, and a bit more. Now, okay, let's move on to the next section. So from the perspective of performance and productivity, we have made significant improvements. The iris tooling and the segment widget performance has been improved significantly. We've also added productivity improvements to form templates, the data and services panel that you see on the right on Iris, which lets you integrate with Foundry, as well as some accessibility enhancements. With this release, we've also added a new adapter type called as for Red Hat PAM. Basically, this is a process automation manager of Red Hat. And with this adapter, you can invoke a daemon rules, start process instances, case instances, or even task management functions of Red Hat PAM using the pre-built adapter. Again, as I said initially, this is adding capability to the built-in adapter suite. Customers can always extend and create their own adapters as well. And as I said, we have plenty of adapters on the marketplace too, which they can use as a custom adapter by importing it. Just like you can import a component from marketplace into your Iris project, you can import an adapter from marketplace also into the Foundry and then reuse it just like a built-in adapter. We've also added support for OpenAPI 3.0 with this release. So you can import Swagger files that is supporting the 3.0 spec. You have the ability to modify the endpoint server URL during the service definition or even during the service reconfiguration. So for those of you that are not aware, service reconfiguration is basically the ability which lets you modify a service for each environment, and that is like a setting that you're doing in the environment. So basically, say I have an application, it is connecting to a database. When I'm testing it in a development system, I want it to connect to the development database in the backend. In the production, it has to connect to a production database, right? So I do not want to specify that development or production piece of the URL when I'm creating the service. So at the design time, it has a specific parameter, but you can override it, you can extend it as part of the service reconfiguration. So when I'm exporting and importing a project, this service reconfiguration applies on top of it. So the app developer does not have to worry about, hey, will this work in that environment? Do I have to make any specific changes? I do it once and set it as a service reconfiguration, and it is available for me moving forward. Now let's look at a new enhancement that we added for the workflow capabilities. So the workflow, I showed you earlier an example of how it is triggered by an object state change. With this release, we have also added the ability to have it triggered by an application event. So the event could be a Foundry event. So Foundry has different events for, say, when a service is invoked, when a service is response back from the customer's perspective, that is mobile application or any client application invoking Foundry. And that is one trigger point. Foundry invoking the customer's backend and customer's backend responding back to Foundry could be another trigger point. That being sent back to the client application could be a different trigger point. Or basically, these are all options for generating server events on the Foundry with just a checkbox. So there is a concept called as Foundry events, server-side events, which you can read to get more familiar. And you can also have an event by the client application calling a specific WebSocket, and that could also be an event, right? And you can create custom code as well to create events. And with that custom code, you can even invoke events from third-party systems like Kafka, so to speak. So with this release, we've added 3 new nodes called as start signal, catch signal, throw signal. This is being in sync with the BPMN 2.0 terminology. And while creating a workflow, you can say, hey, what is the trigger for this? Whether it is a object service, like the object state change that we saw earlier, or whether it is an event. And all the other pieces that I explained earlier about a workflow still applies. So you can go and build this workflow with this kind of a trigger. With this release, we have also added ability to retry a failed workflow. So we saw the workflow, different instances that ran and all that. And we saw that the different stages the workflow passed through, when it passed, how much time it took were all present. But in case of a failure, now we can actually go and retry. Say there was some system, the system sending the email was down when that specific workflow ran, and that failed at the email send perspective. Now, you should be able to, with this release, go and specifically after the email server is stood back up, go and retry that. And at that point, it doesn't have to run any of the previous things because all those already succeeded. That's why it has gotten till this point. It just retries the path that it failed and then proceeds. So if it is able to send the email, it moves on to the next stage, and then it can complete the execution of that workflow. So that is a new capability to resume the workflow execution from the point of failure that was added as part of this release. We've also made significant enhancements to the Foundry publish capabilities. So we've added incremental publish, or basically delta publish. So if your application had 20 services and you only modified 2 services with this incremental publish, you'll only be publishing those 2 services instead of the entire bundle. So this publish method, whether it is going to be full or incremental, is something that you can choose as an option while you're doing the publish, as it is shown here. You also have the ability to skip generation of open APIs if you want to, again, to speed up the publish process. And we have also enhanced the error messaging during the publish. In addition to that, we have also added a new promote application mechanism for the Foundry app, as you can see here. So basically from the snapshot, you can say just promote this application, and you can now promote this application across environments without worrying any changes in the console. So basically your design time view that you can see in the Foundry console is now separated, so you can continue doing your changes there without worrying that this is going to affect what I am publishing to a specific environment, right? And this is also an option now available. And this promotion mechanism is available both from the Foundry console as well as via the command line interface, the MF-CLI. So we saw a lot of the high power features. This was just giving a preview of the functionality that we have with the Volt MX 9.2. Let me just go over a few more features that were released with Volt MX 9.2. We have added support for 5G network API. We've also added support in this release to make it easier to import any third-party web widget into an Iris project. So it could be, say, a specific table design that you see, material web UI, and you're like, hey, I like this specific formatting, can I use it? Yeah, you can basically say go to that source code of that, import it to your local system, build it as a library, and then import that library into your Iris project. At that point, you can make it as a custom widget and reuse it wherever you want in your web application. We've also added support for a new sign-in widget with Apple. We've added support for haptic feedback in Apple Watches. And we've also made significant improvements to identity and backend services from a granular access control perspective. And a lot of the other pieces that are here has been something that we already explained. So this is giving you a release summary, so to speak, of the features in 9.2. Again, calling this out, this is just giving you a preview of the features that were in 9.2. We have the QR codes here, which will take you to the detailed release notes for the Foundry and the Iris piece of it.
Great, Suhas.
Right.
Thank you very much. 2 last slides for you, partly a reminder, but also sharing some new information here. For existing HCL customers using the technology today, you can download Volt MX 9.2 from the HCL Software License and Download Portal, FNO. If you're interested in contacting a customer success manager, Ina and the team, or a product specialist, please use that URL link and that QR code in the middle, and someone will get back to you. And the last thing on this slide here, and I think Suhas may have actually mentioned it to you, but there's a new trial site coming, similar to what we've done with some of the other products. There'll be a trial available for Volt MX where you can download the Iris client and have full access to all of the resources. I'm sure Sharon and the rest of the team will make you aware of that very shortly. So one last slide of the session today. I want to thank everyone for joining. I look forward to HCL, Suhas, Daryl, Gundar, and Ina helping you to be successful with your next mobile and multi-experience project. And so let's make a successful solution together. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to having a conversation in the future. Thanks so much. Goodbye.